Do my podcasts make you uncomfortable? That might be a good thing. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. And today we are finally getting off the dating train. That's right. We've hopped off the discussion of dating on the internet for the time being. I'm sure we'll find more to talk about at a later date. But today we're going to dive into uncomfortable conversations. Uncomfortable conversations. Yes, conversations that don't sit well with us, that do not result in a laugh, and do not result in happy feelings, but result perhaps in at best neutral feelings. This does roughly connect to the red pill community. And yes, as I said in the previous podcast, once again, I'm dipping into that old chestnut of information. And why I'm dipping into a chestnut, I don't know. I don't know why you would hold liquid inside of a chestnut that one would dip into. But we're going to go with that metaphor because I refuse to back down from a fight. Uncomfortable conversations. What are they? People know, generally speaking, what conversations make them uncomfortable. Usually it's something along the lines of, how much money do you make? Politics, religion, things that generally speaking spark some level of conflict. Now, those conversations are very good to have, as you can tell by the emphatic move I made there with my hand if you're watching the video. If you're just listening to me, well, I made an emphatic move to emphasize my point. Uncomfortable conversations are really, really important because it is in conflict that we learn how to digest ideas that are not our own. When we have those conversations when we're very young, we also learn how to have those conversations respectfully. But why does this touch on the red pill community? Well, the red pill community has somewhat co-opted the idea of the importance of uncomfortable conversations and gone, shall we say, buck wild with it. They've decided that anytime they say something controversial, well, they're just sparking an uncomfortable conversation. Well, no. Now, in the last podcast, I did say that we shouldn't use nebulous terms and that if somebody uses a nebulous term, you should run away. So I defined uncomfortable conversation somewhat a little bit earlier, but let's really hone in on what an uncomfortable conversation is. And I've made knife hands now with my hands, so you know we're going to hone in on the definition of uncomfortable conversations. Now, are uncomfortable conversations simply radical ideas that are going to make you somewhat uncomfortable with your situation? Not necessarily. An uncomfortable conversation is quite literally any conversation that does not sit inside of your comfort zone. And for everybody, that's going to be different, which is why we need to learn how to handle these conversations respectfully. Some people are perfectly fine discussing politics because they love the topic, they're knowledgeable on the topic, and they want to just dive in with everybody. They want to learn everything there is to know about everybody's politics. Some people, for many reasons, who are just sort of, generally speaking, they don't like conflict. Generally speaking, they don't know the information they are trying to talk about, and they get uncomfortable if they don't really have a good grasp of the information they're trying to talk about. And some people just, frankly, don't want to be part of it. They just hate politics in general, and they don't want to talk about it. And I don't know why my straw man example there is somebody going, but we move on from that. And if you're watching the YouTube video and you saw the face I made to illustrate that point, I apologize, but you can't sue 10 Minutes with Nick. We are, generally speaking, lawsuit proof, and that is because we have no money. We have no money. I don't know what that accent was. It was trying to be a Russian accent. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out. So forgive me. Forgive me. We do that. And so uncomfortable conversations. It moves around for everybody, but generally speaking, it is any conversation that does not result in a net happiness for you. Generally speaking, if you talk, for the younger folks, if you talk politics at Thanksgiving with your great uncle Larry, who he's right-wing conservative, you generally get uncomfortable with that conversation. Now, I would submit to the jury that's because there's been sort of an absence of uncomfortable conversations that allow the more recent generations to train in how to handle conflict and how to handle conflict respectfully. Why do I keep saying it's important to handle these conversations respectfully? Well, because if you can only talk to people who you are completely at your ease with, you're going to have a really hard time navigating in the world. And I don't mean, again, this is why I brought in the red pill community earlier and their idea of co-opting this stuff. I don't mean that talking to somebody who makes you uncomfortable in the middle of the street, who shoves a microphone in your face, is something you should necessarily find a way to be comfortable with, because that's nerve-wracking for anybody. And somebody who essentially has chosen you as a target because they believe they'll be able to outwit you or outduel you in a battle of wits, that is something that you don't have to be comfortable with, because it's not fair. They've chosen the platform, they've chosen the topic, and they've designed it such that you will fail. The Whatever podcast and the Fresh and Fit podcast are really good examples of this. They have chosen their targets to represent the exact concept that they're trying to find. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those women that they invite onto those podcasts are attention seeking themselves. So they're looking for that publicity, and they don't care how stupid they look. It's part of their brand. It's part of what they're trying to develop. Those aren't the kinds of uncomfortable conversations you need to get comfortable with. And all the respect in the world, what those podcasts and those guys have built, I disagree with the way they go about it. The uncomfortable conversations that you need to learn from are, if you find yourself having a friend with different political views, that should not shatter the friendship. You should be able to talk to that friend and possibly learn from them. Learning is a good thing. Now, again, caveat, if your friend turns out to be a hidden member of the KKK, well, maybe you don't want to get comfortable having a conversation about why the value of that organization is secretly some kind of benefit to society. No, you want to have the conversation of, listen, I've gotten to know you as a person. I think you're a great person, but this is disturbing, and I can't really be friends with you if you're. That's an uncomfortable conversation too. In today's world, we've sort of gotten used to just kind of ghosting people. We've gotten too good at it, right? Like, oh my God, I can't believe I stumbled into the dating world. I swear I didn't mean to do it. I don't know how I got back on this dating train. I feel a little bit like Ozzy Osbourne. I'm going off the rails on this dating train. That's a terrible joke. I worked way too late last night. I'm not on point with these jokes today. But breaking up is the quintessential example of an uncomfortable conversation. And there's no such thing as like an amicable breakup, because generally speaking, and again, somebody's going to say, well, I broke up amicably with my ex. If you broke up amicably with your ex, it might have been amicable for you. I can guarantee you it wasn't for them. It's perfectly fine for it not to be amicable both ways, but it's a conversation you got to have. You can't just ghost the person. You can't just say dumped. You can't just call them up like the joke in How I Met Your Mother and go dumped, click, done. That's not fair. That's not nice. You need to have that uncomfortable conversation. And back in the olden days, we actually had to have that uncomfortable conversation. The skill has been lost to time somewhat. But breaking up is like the lowest stakes level of, or at least breaking up. That's not fair. In terms of stuff that you really want to know how to do, uncomfortable conversations ranks pretty high. In terms of being able to navigate the world, in terms of not restricting your friend group to people who think exactly like you all the time, everywhere, 100%. And, being able to handle when somebody walks in and tells you something that you don't want to hear. You don't want to be completely anxiety-addled thinking about the fact that this conversation could happen at some point. You want to have that skill. And how do you get that skill? You get the skill by having uncomfortable conversations or finding ways to develop your strength or mental health enough to have those conversations. It's important. And I got to tell you, just because you don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation doesn't mean that uncomfortable conversation is going to go away. It's typically just going to get worse. You don't want to start fights with people, but you do want to know how to handle the uncomfortable levels of conflict you may face. Now, again, caveat to all of this. Uncomfortable conversations are not people walking up to you and essentially setting you up to be attacked ad hominem. Ad hominem is a fancy word, essentially just meaning that it's a one-sided attack and it has nothing to do with the argument, has everything to do with who you are as a person if they've decided to attack. So for that, an example of an ad hominem attack during an interview would be you're talking to a woman ostensibly, a man is talking to a woman ostensibly about the gender wage gap, and instead of talking about the gender wage gap, they just sort of insult them for being a woman. That's not an uncomfortable conversation you need to have. That's just an ad hominem attack. But by the same token, having a discussion about things like the gender wage gap is very important. And it's important to be able to listen to all sides, if for no other reason than to simply know enough information about them to debunk them. But you only learn that information by actually having the conversation and learning the information. There's only so much you can learn in books and online. And you actually have to have a lot of these conversations in person. Again, somebody throws a microphone in your face and just blindly insults you and attacks you. That's not fair. But even so, it would help if you were ready. This has been 12 minutes on a show that's generally 10 minutes long. Thank you to all of those who listen and subscribe, all 18 of you, hopefully 19 or 20 by the time this podcast comes out. That's, again, we're not on point with these jokes and weird faces today. It's we don't always have good days. And sometimes we have to have uncomfortable conversations with ourselves to let us know when we're not having a good day. But thank you for listening. Hopefully this wasn't an uncomfortable conversation for you. If you like what I said, like and subscribe. Join the community. If you didn't, it's okay. This is a time when you can just not have an uncomfortable conversation and you can just move right along. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a great day.